So we are going to start with about 5 or 10 minutes of drawing, just because I want to be able to block in our tiger here. Because one of the things I sort of recognized with Chinese watercolor is there's not a lot of layering. And I'm going to put my sort of sample here while we're talking about it. When I was practicing, I had trouble sort of working around that because inevitably, you know, the oranges and the blacks of the tiger are going to blend into the bamboo if you do the bamboo first. So I think what we're going to do is maybe we're going to draw the tiger and then we'll do the bamboo sort of behind him. So that when you're trying to draw the arms here and the stripes on the arms, that the bamboo's not getting in your way. So that might make it a little bit easier. So our first step here is to really draw the tiger in. So I'm going in with a pretty dark, I'm going to draw really dark just so that you guys can see it. But again, with watercolor, the lighter your pencil marks, the better, just so that we don't see them. So I'm working with a 14 and a 6. So this is the 14, this is the 6. And then I also have my, my daughter moved it around a little bit. We have our 3/4 inch flat brush. So these are the 3 that we're going to use today. But first we want to get our tiger penciled in. So this tiger's head is like sort of in the center, but maybe a little bit south of center. So I'm just going to draw a basic circle for where his head's going to go. And then I'll block in details. So that's sort of, I think, where his head's going to be. I'm trying to make sure you can see the whole sheet of paper here. So let me play with my camera a little bit. Okay. All right. And I don't have my paper taped down for this one. Since we're only going to be pre-wetting like sort of smaller parts and nowhere near the edges, I don't think you have to tape it down for this. You still might get your paper rippling a little bit, but I wanted to be able to move my paper around for this drawing. So generally, I'm going to start with where the nose of the tiger is. That's sort of a good midway point. And then you can hardly see this eye in the back. We're going to come up with the forehead, and then his ears are sort of laying back. And then this eye, pretty prominent. And then I also try to sort of trace in the black around his eye, just so that I know exactly sort of where that darkness is. And then I can sort of paint the white around it since I know where it is. Then we're going to come down here and get his muzzle blocked out. And again, I'm drawing really dark. Your paper, you should just barely be able to see these lines. And then we have sort of his tooth sort of falls right under the curve of that part of his muzzle. So I'm going to draw those in. And I'm not being exact about this at all. Chinese watercolor is less about a direct imitation of something, but like getting the essence or the spirit of that thing you're painting. So here we have our tiger head, and then everything else is sort of going to be based off or measure from key points of the head. Okay, so that's our basic tiger. Before I start painting, I'm going to go in just for myself. If your drawing is light enough where you don't want to go in and erase some of it, that's fine. But I do want to, I'm going to go in and erase just so that these lines aren't as strong. Hopefully you can still see them to a certain extent. Because that's a lot of pencil that would show through our watercolor. Okay, so what we're going to do first is the bamboo. We're going to do the bamboo sort of coming out behind him, and I might have one bamboo coming up through like the middle of his body. One of the key Chinese techniques is when you get multiple colors loaded up on your brush at one time, so that you really only have to make one stroke, and boom, you have a multicolored, three-dimensional stroke of paint that you don't have to touch anymore, and it literally just takes one stroke to do it. I'm going to get a little bit of ultramarine blue, and you can play around with your colors. If you want the bamboo to be green, like it traditionally is, go for it. But what we want to achieve here is a lighter, really diluted color that's going to saturate your entire paintbrush. And then we're going to just dip the corners of this. So I'm using the 3/4 inch flat brush. We're going to saturate this up with a really diluted color, and then we're literally going to dip the edges, the two corners of this paintbrush, straight into the watercolor that you've squeezed out of your tubes. I should have maybe started with that you're going to need really, really wet watercolor for this, straight out of the tube. If you're using pan colors that you start off dry, I would just go in and really pour water on the top of your dry pans and let that really soak in and get really wet. And then you can dip the corners of your paintbrush into that. That might need a couple minutes to get really, really wet and saturated though. I have sort of a very cool blue-gray that I'm going to dilute down even more. So I have my paintbrush really, really loaded up with this sort of bluish gray. And I'm actually going to squeeze a little bit more out of my tube, more ultramarine blue, just so that I know I have quite a lot to work with. So in here, in the diluted mixture I have, yes, it's a mix of Payne's Gray and ultramarine. But then when I'm dipping the corners of my paintbrush, I'm dipping it straight into ultramarine that I just squeezed out of the tube. And I'm only going to dip a centimeter of each of one of these tips. And so I'm holding my paintbrush. I know you can't see it that well. I'm holding my paintbrush at sort of a 45-degree angle. I'm forming a little triangle of that paint onto like each side of the paintbrush. And then, so I'll show you exactly what that looks like once you start painting. And I'll do my first one not in front of the tiger, but behind the tiger, just so that we can see exactly what we're going for. And then it's just one stroke. So that's what we get when we dip both of our corners, is we get essentially a cylinder that looks like there's shadow on both sides. And then the middle is sort of your midtones and your highlights, sort of all inclusive. It only takes one stroke to get it done. So what I'm going to do is a couple more bamboo branches, and then I'll show you how to make leaves using the same technique, loading the paint up on your paintbrush the same way. And I'm redoing this for every branch of bamboo that I want here. So I'm going to start near the top of his head. I'm not going to go all the way to where I painted the top of his head, just because I don't want paint to blend in his painting at all. At least the colors of the tiger and the bamboo, I want them to be pretty separate. So here's another branch of bamboo. And then I'll probably do a couple just coming from the ground here. And then I am going to do one in front of the tiger's body. So again, I'm going to put the paintbrush back into our Payne's Gray and ultramarine combo here, which is going to make this color change, right? Like this color now has more ultramarine blue because all the excess of where I dipped it on each side is going to go back into here. But that'll create some depth if each branch of bamboo is like slightly a different color. So get that really loaded up, and then go into your ultramarine blue again and dip your corners. And I'm just gonna start from the very bottom of the page and move up. And you might still have some pooling of colors. You can use I'm using the corner of my paintbrush to sort of just reinforce, move some of that paint around. And going back in, I want to do 2 more of these bamboos before I start with the leaves. So getting it really saturated, I'm sort of laying my paintbrush down flat on one side and then flipping it, doing the other side just to make sure I'm fully saturated, but that I'm not dripping. I want to get excess off just a teeny bit. And then I'm dipping my corners into my ultramarine. And then I'm going to come in and do another strand of bamboo. I'm going to cross with the other ones I did, just to see how that works. It does sort of reinforce how transparent it still is. So maybe that's not going to look realistic, I guess. The bamboo isn't transparent, but. So I'm going to do one more, and this one's going to be in front of the tiger, so I will have to paint around this piece of bamboo just a little bit. Here we go. So that's how to do pretty easy, like one stroke, sort of cylinder type shapes. What we're going to do now is we're going to use the same brush, same size brush, same technique of loading the color onto your paintbrush, but we're going to make leaves of bamboo instead of just the stalk. So I'm going to load up my paintbrush again, same way as before. Get any excess off. And dip your corners. And then let me try to get a camera angle that you can really see this. Where I want the tip of the paintbrush, where I want the tip of the leaf to go, I'm going to start there. I'm going to start out here. So this corner is going to be the tip of the leaf. So I'm going to lay that down on the paper first. And then I'm going to, as I'm twisting my paintbrush, I'm going to bear down on it so it gets a little bit thicker. And then the closer you get to the stalk of the bamboo, I'm going to come back. And that's sort of how you do a leaf. Is you start off really, really light pressure with one corner of the paintbrush. And then you put the full paintbrush down, put a lot of pressure on it so it widens up, and then bring it right back up. And lift off the paper. So I'm going to do that quite a few more times. Okay, so now that's basically one of the 2 Chinese techniques that we're covering today. This is the one where there's multiple colors on your paintbrush at once, and you create a form out of one brush stroke. So, each stalk of this bamboo was just one brush stroke, and then each leaf was one brush stroke. The next one and that's what we'll handle on the tiger, is making one continuous line where you don't pick up your paintbrush, and keeping that line simple, yet capturing the movement of sort of the border of an animal. So that's what we're going to do with the tiger. I'm going to use my number 14 to sort of block in different parts of the tiger that we need to do before we do the stripes. So I'm going to go back into the color that I was using for sort of the center of these bamboos. I'm going to use that same color because what I've also learned in Chinese watercolor from just how many images I researched was they do work with a pretty limited color palette. So I'm going to block in those darker tones, and then the orange that we make for the tiger, that's going to layer on top of where those shadows are. So the color will change a little bit because it's going to have another color laid on top of it. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to block in sort of the area right above his nose. It's sort of a darker color. But then his sort of, I guess, cheeks or muzzle here sort of stay white. So I'm going to leave that alone. But I'm going to take this shadow color. So I'm going to come up to the top of his head. I'm not going to touch this bamboo. I'm going to leave a little bit of a border just so that they don't start blending together. Right above his eye. And again, I'm not painting the stripes right now. I'm just painting where the orange of his body gets a little bit darker than other spots. So we have an area right under his eye that gets darker. And I'm going to blend in the sort of boundaries of this color with pure water here in just a second. So I'm going to come in. And again, we're going to need to use some artistic license down here, especially if you didn't put the bamboo in front of him, to sort of imagine what those areas looked like that were in front of the bamboo. I'm essentially putting his entire leg in shadow, except for the very tip of his paws. The tip of his paws just sort of go white. So I'm going to stop that shadow color right where his little claws start. I'm also going to do the same down here. His paws sort of curves in. So where it curves in, right under that curve, is going to get the shadow color plus the very tip of his claw, very top part. Okay, and then this area right below his, or right behind his shoulders, that sort of small of his back is in shadow just a little bit. And also another thing I found with Chinese watercolor, the light source isn't like completely defined, because like if the top of his shoulder is a highlight, you would think like his entire back is also in highlight because the sun is above him. But I think in this instance, they're just trying to show that he is sort of facing us. So things that are behind sort of the focal point of the tiger, which is his face, things behind that are going to be a little bit in a darker tone just to show depth. So Chinese watercolors sort of plays around with light sources a little bit. It's not fully realistic, which I think makes Chinese illustrations get away with doing sort of the black border around the animal as well, because we're not going for realism here. We're just going for the essence of our subject matter. So what I want to do now are sort of blend in this shadow color just a little bit. So I'm going to come in with just clear water and sort of rub that into some of the boundaries here. Some of them you can sort of leave alone, like this shadow that comes under the eye, so there's like a black part around the eye, and then there's going to be a white part right under the black. That's a pretty strong boundary, so I'm going to leave that one alone, but I'm going to blend in the bottom one here because this side of the face sort of goes from darker orange to lighter orange to white. So I do want a blending there. I'm going to come in on his back and sort of blend the very ends of those. I'm going to keep this strong border again because his shoulders have that strong highlight on it. And then I think this leg I can leave alone, but this outside paw, I'm going to blend in the shadows a little bit. And again, I'm trying real hard to not touch, not aggravate the bamboo that's in front of this tiger. Okay, so that's basically where our shadows lie. So then I'm going to work on mixing the orange of our tiger here. So I'm going to start with the light gray, or sorry, not light gray, light yellow. I'm going to get a bunch of that. And again, since I'm working with paints that are right out of the tube, they're really wet, so when you go in to pick paint, you're picking up a lot. So I went and picked up paint twice and sort of diluted it over here. And then I'm going to add my Brushstroke red just a teeny bit at a time. And see, even then I think I picked up a little bit too much because I'm still using my big size 14 brush. If you want to go back to your 6 to actually mix your paint so you're picking up less paint at one time, go for it. But I'm just going to pick up a bit more yellow because I want to get a good orange first before I start making it a little bit darker. Once you get an orange that you really like, I'm going to go in with some burnt sienna or burnt umber. Really add that a little bit at a time because you still want this color to be orange. You just want it to be not fluorescent. Since you've already put down shadows, some of these areas are going to become a darker brown, or sorry, a darker orange already because it's going to be layered on top of a shadow. So I'm going to go with an orange that I only dipped into my burnt sienna twice. And I'm just dipping in the tip of my paintbrush. So I feel like this orange it looks like a natural orange to me. It doesn't look neon, it doesn't look fluorescent. So this is the orange that I'm going to go with. And I'm going to go in and sort of feel the areas. Obviously the areas that we went in with pure water and just blended, those are still wet, which is totally okay. I mean, we want that orange to blend in a little bit. And we're going to do the same as we did with the shadow. We're going to blend in this orange into the white areas of him as well. But I do want to, I'm going to cover everything I did with that shadow color is going to get a layer of this orange on it. And then we're going to extend that orange outside of where we put that shadow color just a little bit, so that we do get some of that pure orange, but then we're going to come back and blend this side of that orange into the white of his cheeks. And if you want to work with your smaller paintbrush here, just because we have to get into some smaller areas, feel free. I'm going to keep using my 14 just because it really does come to like a fine point. So I feel confident that I can use just the very tip of this paintbrush and get into those small areas. So you can see in my painting, the face is sort of where the most intense orange is, and that's where I want it. I want the face to be the focal point. So I am going to come in with my smaller brush now so that I can really blend this orange into the white and not touch the orange over here. And I'm just doing this in like really small circular motions because I also don't want to have like sort of linear paint or brush strokes. So I'm doing this in sort of a circular motion, and that will kick up more paint to go this direction. And sort of leave that white area white. You could even come in, I'm going to come in sort of with the side of my paintbrush. Sort of move a lot of that paint up so that this remains really, really light and blended. And I think the only other area I really need to do that is the arc from like the top of his shoulder down to his chest. All right, so this is sort of where I designated a break. We want to let this orange dry before we start going in with the stripes so that the stripes stay distinctive and clean and clear. So hopping back into this tiger painting, if you have spaces, orange spaces that are still a little wet, I'm going to go in with my tissue and sort of lift that sort of excess off because I really don't want any of these black stripes or dark stripes that we're going to put down. I do not want them to blend at all. You might have this issue here where it took off all of the orange. That I do want some orange there. I just don't want pools of orange. So I'm going to come back to this area sort of last. We'll do the stripes everywhere else first. So to mix this color, I'm going to go in with my burnt sienna. And I'm going to actually not dilute this color a whole lot. The dark stripes of this tiger don't seem very transparent at all. It's not like you can see that orange coming through. So I'm gonna use just enough water to get it to a fluidity that is easy to paint with. But before we start just diving in with the stripes, it's good to get these larger areas done just to test it out. I think though what I do want to do again to avoid the side of your palm sort of touching anything that you've already painted and is still wet, I'm going to start at the tip of the tail with the stripes and then come down. But that's it. That is our Chinese technique